Just like that, Venezuela's got a new president. Was he elected? Nope. But after swearing himself in, Juan Guaido was recognized as the legit president of Venezuela by Trump, Canada, and a bunch of right-wing Latin American countries allied with the US. Apparently, appointing yourself president is all it takes. But for real, what's happening in Venezuela is a straight-up coup against that country's democratically elected leader, Nicolas Maduro. And it's creating the dangerous conditions for a civil war, with several people already reported dead. My God, one week it's Syria, today it's Venezuela, next week it's Iran. Pick a damn country, America. It's pretty amazing that the same country that spent 2 years screaming about alleged Russian election meddling in 2016 is now applauding US meddling in Venezuela. But if you're watching US corporate news media, you would have no idea the US is meddling. They label Maduro a dictator and insist that all Venezuelans support the people that the US wants in power.
Maduro dictatorship, a dictator with no legitimate claim to power.
It has been a disaster on all counts.
What they leave out is that there are millions of people in Venezuela who voted for and support Maduro's government.
Aquí está el pueblo de Venezuela, aquí está el pueblo de Caracas, marchando en defensa de la revolución, en defensa de la democracia, no a la intervención imperialista.
Que nadie votó por esa persona, nadie votó. Yo voté por Maduro, mi voto es por Maduro.
But these people have been made invisible by an American corporate media that's been giddy over the prospect of a right-wing takeover of Venezuela for decades. So much so that they recognize the legitimacy of a dude who just up and declared himself president, and are calling that democracy. The US has been trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government since Hugo Chavez became president in 1999. Chavez redistributed wealth to the poor and used the country's oil resources to fund social programs, which pissed off the country's elites. He also tried to unite the region against US economic dominance, and made it difficult for the US to profit off of Venezuela's oil reserves, which are the largest reserves in the world. That's right, where there's a coup, there's almost always oil. As far as US imperialism is concerned, countries aren't allowed to be socialists, let alone forge their own paths independent of US interests. That's why the US has repeatedly attempted to overthrow the government and has sanctioned the hell out of Venezuela, strangling its economy and depriving average Venezuelans of access to basic necessities, like life-saving medications. And then the trolls come along and say, see, socialism doesn't work. Well, the problem isn't socialism, it's sabotage. In 2002, George W. Bush succeeded in facilitating a right-wing coup in Venezuela, but it only lasted 2 days because Chavez had the overwhelming support of the country's people as well as the military. Ever since then, both Democrats and Republicans, as well as America's corporate media outlets, have been salivating at the chance to replace Venezuela's government with a right-wing regime that's friendly to American corporate interests. That's one reason why they characterize Venezuela's leadership as a dictatorship, even though their leaders are democratically elected in elections that take place regularly. Nicolas Maduro was democratically elected last May in an election that the US-backed opposition boycotted and has continued to challenge after he was sworn into office. Venezuela's US-backed opposition likes to portray itself as democratic and progressive, but the opposition-controlled National Assembly, led by the self-declared coup president Juan Guaido, drafted a transition law that lays out his plan for large-scale privatization of state assets and a free market economic system that promotes property rights and freedom of enterprise. In other words, a return to an exploitative capitalist model that privileges private corporations and the rich. This is why US claims that it's concerned about Venezuelan human rights are laughable. I mean, do you really expect anyone to believe that the same country that's BFFs with absolute monarchs who chop up dissidents with bone saws gives two shits about freedom and democracy in Venezuela? And look at America's friends in the region. It's not like they're paragons of democracy. The US has no complaints about Brazil's new fascist president, Bolsonaro, or the right-wing leadership it put in power in Honduras that kills environmental activists. You know, Honduras, where the US backed a coup in 2009 that plunged the country into chaos, causing tens of thousands of unaccompanied Honduran children to flee for their lives to the US. This, of course, empowered the anti-immigrant far-right in the US. We could see the same thing happen in Venezuela, with another wave of refugees that will fuel the far-right even more. The point is, the US does not care about human rights of Venezuelans, nor does it care about democracy. It cares about oil. It cares about economically controlling the region. It's about imperialism, stupid. The self-appointed president, Juan Guaido, may have been recognized as legitimate by the US and its right-wing allies in the region, like Brazil and Colombia, but this coup was also rejected by the region's left-wing governments, including Mexico, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Cuba. The high military command in Venezuela is also standing by Maduro, but the situation remains incredibly dangerous. Even if the US's guide doesn't get to take over Venezuela, this is going to incite violence and possibly a civil war. As for those opposed to Maduro, fine, you don't have to love him, but it's not up to the US or anyone else to decide Venezuela's future. After all, when has US meddling ever ended well for the people in the targeted country? Honduras, Syria, Iraq, and Libya are just a handful of a long list of countries that are worse off after US meddling. The result is always more oppression, more authoritarianism, more violence, more misery, more privatization, more corporate exploitation, and more poverty. Every single time. And this time around won't be any different.